My parents had always made it clear who their favorite was, but I never expected it to sting this sharply. When I opened my credit card statement, my heart sank. $13,700 spent, not on groceries, not on bills, but on my sister's luxury cruise. I couldn't believe my eyes. Later that evening, my mom waved the brochure in front of me, laughing as if I were invisible. "It's not like you ever travel anyway," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. My father just chuckled, not a word of concern. I smiled faintly, said, "Enjoy your trip," and walked away. No one noticed the tension, no one cared. But inside, a quiet fire began, one I knew I would control carefully. No rash actions, only the patience to turn this injustice into something they'd never forget. Have you ever felt completely invisible in your own family, like your worth didn't matter? I'm Caroline, and I've spent years quietly giving, supporting, and staying composed while others took credit for my life. But sometimes, patience isn't weakness, it's preparation. I want to show you what happens when the people who underestimate you think they've won, and how staying calm, observing, and planning can turn their arrogance into your advantage. Living under my parents' roof had always been a delicate balancing act. On the surface, everything seemed normal, me, the responsible daughter, quietly paying bills, managing chores, and keeping the household running while they enjoyed the comforts I provided. I worked tirelessly in my career, building stability, and saving for my future, but in their eyes, none of it mattered. My sister, on the other hand, floated through life with every whim granted, every desire fulfilled, no questions asked. I had learned early that speaking up invited ridicule, my suggestions were ignored, my efforts minimized. I cooked, cleaned, paid their bills, and never once asked for acknowledgement. The emotional labor was exhausting, but I carried it silently, believing that one day, the scales would tip. Yet, that day seemed far away. Every decision my parents made reminded me where I stood, always a step behind my sister, always the quiet one who could be overlooked, dismissed, or taken for granted. My own dreams were postponed, my opinions brushed aside, and my achievements quietly overshadowed by my sister's presence. And yet, I kept moving, carefully documenting, observing, and noting every slight, every laugh at my expense. Because deep down, I knew patience wasn't surrender. It was the seed of power, the calm before the storm that would eventually restore balance in a way they'd never see coming. It started with small things, harmless, almost unnoticeable, but persistent. My parents would forget to inform me about family plans, appointments, or gatherings that involved my sister but conveniently excluded me. Invitations arrived late, directions were vague, and I was left to scramble or miss out entirely. At first, I brushed it off as oversight. But patterns became impossible to ignore. My sister received gifts I wasn't told about, trips I wasn't mentioned for, and praise that felt like it belonged to me. When I questioned, my mother would dismiss me with a laugh. "Don't be so sensitive, Caroline." My father would shrug, eyes fixed elsewhere, pretending nothing was wrong. Others didn't see it. Friends, colleagues, even distant relatives couldn't detect the subtle discrimination, they only saw my composed demeanor. Yet I noticed. Every glance, every tone, every whispered laugh carried meaning. The disrespect was deliberate, systematic, and designed to remind me of my place. I realized that endurance alone wasn't enough. I needed awareness. Observation would be my weapon, patience my shield. Every small slight was a clue, every underestimation an opportunity. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of my mind, a plan began to form, one that would ensure the people who thought they could treat me like an afterthought would face consequences they'd never expect. As weeks passed, the dismissals grew bolder. My parents' confidence in their favoritism turned into arrogance, and my sister's smugness was almost palpable. At family dinners, she would casually make demands that I would quietly fulfill, while my parents laughed at jokes that humiliated me without a second thought. One evening, my mom announced, "Caroline, make sure the house is spotless before my trip. I'd hate to leave it messy." Her words weren't just instructions, they were a reminder that I existed only to serve. I kept my composure, nodding politely, but inside, the resentment simmered. The more they ignored my worth, the more I observed, recording every misstep, every hypocrisy, every instance of their arrogance. Publicly, they presented a perfect family image. My sister smiled, radiant in their approval, while I remained the quiet, helpful figure in the background. No one outside our home saw the subtle cruelty. Privately, however, the inequality was stark. Their blatant disregard wasn't lost on me. Every laugh at my expense, every indulgence of my sister, every assumption that I would silently accept being undervalued, they were building a tower of arrogance, unaware that I was preparing the foundation for their eventual downfall. I realized that control wasn't about confrontation, it was about timing, strategy, and calm observation. The more they assumed I was powerless, the more information I gathered, the clearer my advantage became. Their confidence in their superiority would soon be the very thing that unraveled them. The more I stayed silent, the more my parents' behavior made me question myself. Was I overreacting? Was I too sensitive? They were masters of subtle gaslighting, making me doubt my perceptions while praising my sister for traits I had honed myself. "You worry too much, Caroline," my mother would say, her tone sweet yet condescending. "Your sister just knows how to enjoy life." At first, I felt the sting of self-doubt. Every decision I made, every effort I put in, seemed invisible, unappreciated, and, in their eyes, irrelevant. Friends noticed my hesitation, my quietness, but I couldn't explain. It wasn't weakness, it was strategy. I had to endure. I had to survive without showing vulnerability. Yet, amid the confusion and isolation, I clung to a sense of dignity. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't retaliate, at least, not openly. Instead, I focused on observing, on documenting, on remembering. Every laugh at my expense, every boast about my sister's life, every careless misuse of my resources was recorded in my mind and in careful notes. This period of quiet endurance was grueling, mentally exhausting, and laced with doubt. But it also became a crucible, sharpening my awareness and teaching me that strength didn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it hid in patience, in strategy, in the unshakable calm that would allow me to strike decisively when the moment was right. Even as they assumed I was broken, I was preparing. And in that preparation, I found a quiet sense of control, one that no amount of ridicule or favoritism could take away. Then came the blow I wasn't expecting, but had to endure. My parents announced that they had taken care of the house I owned, claiming it was their decision to manage it while I was at work. They framed it as generosity, yet it felt like a public display of control, a reminder that even my most personal achievements could be taken from me. My sister, of course, gleamed with approval, basking in the glow of their praise, completely unaware of the financial and emotional toll they had inflicted. I felt the sharp sting of humiliation, the kind that silences you in front of people who should never underestimate you. Friends and distant relatives commented on how lucky my sister was, how responsible my parents seemed, while I nodded politely, holding back the truth. No one suspected the simmering determination behind my calm exterior. It was, to the outside world, a crushing loss. Socially, it appeared that I had no power, no leverage, no recourse. Legally, I had limited visibility because they had framed it as familial goodwill. I was on the verge of despair, but I reminded myself, appearances are deceiving. This moment of apparent defeat was crucial. While they celebrated my presumed incapacity, I was gathering evidence, noting timelines, documenting discrepancies, and quietly plotting. Every laugh, every boast, every subtle insult became a step toward a reckoning they couldn't see coming. What they perceived as my weakness was merely the calm before the storm. I let them believe I had been defeated completely. Little did they know, the real shift had already begun, invisible yet unstoppable. After the apparent loss, I retreated into quiet observation. I didn't argue, I didn't plead, I didn't lash out. I maintained my routines, kept my composure, and, most importantly, watched closely. Every detail mattered, the timing of their calls, the way they spoke to my sister, the assumptions they made about me. I realized that endurance wasn't just surviving, it was accumulating knowledge. Each slight, each laugh at my expense, each careless action was a piece of the puzzle. My parents and sister assumed I had no awareness, no strategy. They thought my silence was submission. In reality, it was the perfect cover for meticulous planning. Isolation became a tool rather than a burden. In solitude, I documented everything, transactions, timelines, conversations, and patterns of favoritism. I understood that public humiliation and family arrogance were fleeting unless they were met with carefully measured consequences. The more they underestimated me, the clearer my advantage became. While they floated on their cloud of self-satisfaction, I remained grounded, patient, and vigilant. Every moment of endurance strengthened my resolve, sharpened my awareness, and prepared me for the pivotal actions that would restore balance and claim the justice they had long denied me. I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that the storm they couldn't see was already gathering. It was in the small, repetitive details that the truth finally revealed itself. I began noticing the same patterns over and over: how my parents would spend my money without hesitation, how they praised my sister for things I had done, and how every decision subtly reinforced the hierarchy in which I was always last. At first, it felt like an endless cycle, one I could never break. But recognizing the repetition gave me clarity. The humiliation, the dismissals, the favoritism, they weren't random. They were predictable. And predictability is power. I started to anticipate their moves. When my mom booked another surprise trip for my sister, I knew exactly what to expect: how they would dismiss me, how my sister would flaunt it, how I would remain the quiet observer. Instead of frustration, I felt a sense of control. Understanding their patterns meant that I could prepare, measure, and wait for the perfect moment. It became a mental game. Every conversation, every gesture, every assumption they made about my silence was a piece of leverage I could use. I began planning in my mind, imagining the steps that would eventually allow me to reclaim what was mine, expose the injustice, and let the public, or at least the right people, see the truth. Recognition brought not anger, but calm. For the first time, I felt the thrill of strategy rather than the sting of helplessness. I understood that patience wasn't passive. It was a weapon. And as I watched my family continue to underestimate me, I smiled quietly, knowing that the moment of reckoning was already taking shape. While my family reveled in their perceived control, I quietly amassed evidence they could never anticipate. Every transaction, every misuse of my credit card, every casual boast about my sister's deserved luxuries was documented. I had copies of receipts, screenshots, and timelines neatly organized. I knew exactly when and how my money had been spent, and I kept meticulous notes of every conversation that hinted at entitlement and favoritism. They were utterly unaware. My mother and father assumed that I would remain silent forever, that their arrogance and my sister's indulgence had me trapped. But the advantage I held was invisible, a secret arsenal. Each time they laughed at my expense, I added to the file, each instance reinforcing the narrative I could someday present with irrefutable clarity. Even my sister was oblivious. Her carefree boasting, her flaunting of trips paid with my money, and her endless bragging about their generosity only added fuel to the evidence I collected. I let her believe she was untouchable. I let my parents believe I was powerless. They were blind to the careful construction of my plan, the slow accumulation of leverage that would soon give me complete control. I didn't need confrontation yet. The patience I had practiced for years had finally paid off. With every passing day, my advantage grew. I had the documentation, the timeline, and the calm resolve to act when the moment was right. And because they couldn't see it, they couldn't guard against it. This hidden advantage gave me a quiet confidence. I wasn't acting out of spite, I was orchestrating justice. And in the silence, in the observation, in the careful collection of facts, I had already won the first, and most crucial, battle. As I watched my parents and sister continue their routine, I felt a subtle shift within myself. The desperation and self-doubt that had shadowed me during their dismissals were fading. In their eyes, I was still the quiet, compliant daughter, but inside, I was transforming. I no longer sought their approval or validation. Their laughter, their favoritism, their blatant disregard for my efforts, it no longer dictated my emotions. I realized that my power had always been within me, not in their recognition. Calm confidence replaced frustration, and clarity replaced confusion. Every slight they threw my way became irrelevant in the face of the strategy one had quietly built. I understood that dignity wasn't about forcing respect. It was about embodying it, quietly and consistently, while preparing for the right moment to assert authority. The more I observed, the more I appreciated the control I now wielded over my own reactions. I could smile politely, nod silently, and carry out their minor requests while knowing that the ultimate reckoning was in my hands. My patience had become my strength. Even when my sister boasted about her luxurious trips, funded by my money, I felt no anger, only a serene certainty that she would not remain untouchable. I had all the facts, all the leverage, and the inner calm to act decisively when the time was right. This transformation was quiet, almost imperceptible to anyone watching, but it was complete. Where once I had felt powerless, I now felt invisible power, the kind that could orchestrate outcomes, reclaim justice, and expose arrogance without a single outburst. I had become untethered from their perception of me. And in that freedom, I discovered the most dangerous advantage of all: patience married to certainty. With my calm confidence established, I began planning each step meticulously. Every action had a purpose, every move measured. I didn't rush. Revenge, I knew, was most effective when it was deliberate, legal, and irreversible. First, I confirmed the details of my parents' ownership of the house they were living in. I verified legal documents, ensuring that I had full authority to act when the moment arrived. Every transaction, every proof of spending on my sister's trip, and every pattern of neglect or favoritism was catalogued. Nothing was left to chance. I visualized the sequence, how they would react, how my sister would boast, how I could reveal the truth at exactly the right time. I imagined the public, my friends, and extended family finally seeing the reality that had been hidden for so long. Their overconfidence became my ally, their arrogance, my map. Meanwhile, I maintained the appearance of normalcy. I smiled when they expected compliance, I nodded politely at their jokes, I fulfilled minor requests without complaint. I never let them glimpse the storm that was quietly taking shape. Each interaction became a rehearsal, each casual conversation a way to test assumptions. I also prepared my emotional armor. I knew that when the moment came, it would be tempting to let satisfaction slip into cruelty. But true power lay in restraint. I practiced calm delivery, letting facts speak for themselves, allowing justice to unfold without my needing to raise my voice. By the end of this preparation, I felt untouchable, not because I had conquered them yet, but because I had mastered myself. I had the documentation, the timeline, the strategy, and the unshakable patience. I was ready to step into the arena they thought they controlled, and finally, reclaim what had been mine all along. The day they returned from their extravagant trip, I was ready. My parents expected the usual quiet compliance, my sister expected applause for her hard-earned adventures. Instead, they were met with calm precision. I greeted them politely, hiding the quiet triumph that simmered beneath the surface. The house looked exactly the same as when they left, but the subtle tension in the air was unmistakable. My phone displayed dozens of missed calls, voicemails stacked like evidence of their oversight and arrogance. I let them chatter, boast, and flaunt as if nothing had changed, all while I observed, measured, and waited for the moment to reveal the truth. Every step they took in the familiar space, the place where they had assumed control, was now part of my carefully crafted stage. Their confidence, once so palpable, became a tool I could manipulate. I didn't need to speak loudly or make threats. Their assumptions, their carelessness, and their underestimation of me set the scene for their own undoing. I realized that power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it returns quietly, invisibly, allowing the arrogance of others to expose itself. And today, in the house they had always taken for granted, the stage was set. I could feel the shift in control, subtle yet undeniable, and for the first time, they would see that the person they thought powerless had quietly mastered the rules of the game. My parents' confidence quickly shifted into overreach. They assumed that I would react in panic or confusion, that I would be overwhelmed by the audacity of their spending and entitlement. My sister, buoyed by their praise, flaunted receipts, photos, and stories from her lavish trip, completely oblivious to the careful strategy one had built. "You really should be grateful," my mother said, waving her hands at the pile of documents I had quietly gathered over the past months. "We've always looked out for you, Caroline." I smiled politely. Inside, I felt no anger, only a quiet awareness. They were revealing everything themselves, unaware that their boasts and overconfidence were filling in the missing pieces for the case I had prepared. Every slip, every careless comment, every assumption of my subservience became evidence against them. My father even tried to assert authority over the house, reminding me of their supposed generosity in letting me live there for free. Each word they spoke, meant to intimidate, only reinforced the story I had documented. The arrogance of thinking they could manipulate me without consequence was glaring, almost comical. I let them continue. I did not interrupt, I did not correct. Their overconfidence built the very leverage I would use to reclaim control. Every misstep, every boast about entitlement, every casual dismissal of my efforts became part of the undeniable record. In the quiet of my observation, I realized that true power didn't come from confrontation, it came from patience, timing, and letting the other party incriminate themselves. And right now, they were doing it perfectly, blind to the fact that their downfall had already begun. Finally, the moment arrived. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't shout. I simply laid out the facts. Receipts, statements, timelines, all meticulously organized, were placed in front of them. While you were away on your luxury trip, I said softly, this is how my money was spent. Every dollar, every transaction, every plan you made without my consent is documented here. My parents froze. My mother's smile faltered, my father's eyes widened. My sister, mid-boast, faltered as the evidence unfolded. They had assumed I would remain silent, that my patience meant weakness. Instead, the truth spoke louder than any argument could. I didn't accuse with emotion. I didn't dramatize. I simply showed them what was already indisputable. The documents, the screenshots, the meticulous records, all told the story of entitlement, favoritism, and misuse of my resources. Their own words and actions were the witnesses against them. The room was silent. My calm composure contrasted sharply with their sudden panic and disbelief. The evidence left no room for denial. What they had treated as trivial, what they had assumed I would overlook, was now undeniable and public. And in that silence, the power shifted. I didn't have to raise my voice or humiliate them personally. The facts, the careful strategy, and the patience I had practiced for months did it all for me. For the first time, my parents realized they had underestimated me completely. The arrogance they had wielded for years crumbled under the weight of the truth. And my sister, who had so confidently flaunted privileges she didn't earn, saw her false sense of superiority evaporate instantly. I stood quietly, letting the truth do its work. Justice didn't need a spectacle, it needed precision, preparation, and patience. And in that quiet revelation, the reckoning they had never expected was complete. The aftermath of the truth release was immediate. My parents' carefully cultivated image of generosity and superiority crumbled before my eyes. Extended family members, friends, and even neighbors who had once praised their wisdom now looked at them with astonishment. Their social reputation, so long built on favoritism and appearances, collapsed quietly but utterly. My sister, who had flaunted her luxurious trip as a mark of privilege, could no longer maintain her smug demeanor. Every boast, every casual brag, now sounded hollow in the presence of irrefutable facts. The reality of what had transpired, the misuse of my hard-earned money, the arrogance of my parents, the blind favoritism, was impossible to ignore. I didn't gloat. I didn't mock. My power lay in restraint, in letting the evidence and the clarity of my composure speak for me. Their collapse was public, undeniable, and irreversible, yet it was executed without cruelty. I had merely returned balance, exposing arrogance through precision rather than emotion. Even casual acquaintances who had never known the depth of my patience could sense the shift. Whispers of surprise, nods of acknowledgement, subtle looks of realization, they all confirmed what I had long known: the scales of power had finally tipped. And as I watched, quietly confident, I understood the ultimate lesson: true authority doesn't need theatrics. It requires strategy, patience, and the courage to let facts speak louder than any outburst could. The house, once a place of control by my parents, had now become a stage for quiet justice. And in that transformation, I felt the serene satisfaction of having reclaimed not just what was mine, but the dignity and respect that had been denied to me for so long. In the days that followed, the consequences unfolded naturally. My parents, once so confident and dismissive, now approached me cautiously, aware that their arrogance had been exposed. My sister, whose carefree indulgence had relied entirely on my patience and resources, realized that her privileges came with accountability she hadn't anticipated. The house, my parents' assumed sanctuary, had quietly changed hands while they were away. They could no longer claim authority over it. I had reclaimed control legally, carefully, and irrevocably. Every financial decision they had taken without consent now had tangible repercussions. Socially, the shift was undeniable. Friends and extended family who had once admired or envied my sister's lifestyle now recognized the quiet injustice she had benefited from. My patience, strategy, and restraint had turned the tables, restoring balance without drama or spectacle. Even my parents had to acknowledge, silently, begrudgingly, that I was no longer the overlooked, compliant daughter. I had transformed my endurance into leverage, my observations into strategy, and my calm into undeniable authority. The arrogance they had wielded for years had become the very instrument of their loss. And throughout it all, I remained composed, serene, and unshaken. My quiet victory was complete, yet invisible to those who didn't understand the patience it required. As I reflected on the months of strategy, observation, and patience, I realized that true power had never been about confrontation or loud displays. It was about endurance, awareness, and the quiet confidence to act with precision when the time was right. I had transformed humiliation into understanding, confusion into clarity, and favoritism into leverage. By staying composed and documenting every injustice, I had reclaimed not only what was mine but also my dignity, respect, and sense of self-worth. Justice, I learned, doesn't always need to be publicized or dramatic. Sometimes, it unfolds silently, leaving arrogance exposed and entitlement humbled. I didn't need to gloat. The facts, the strategy, and the calm execution had spoken louder than any words could. In the end, my parents and sister were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. And I, Caroline, finally experienced the quiet release of balance restored, a satisfaction rooted not in revenge, but in the clarity, patience, and intelligence with which I had handled every slight, every humiliation, every injustice. Power, patience, and dignity, these were the true victors. And they were mine.